It's the second week of August, and in a duplex outside Phoenix, Kevin opens his electric bill and doesn't even flinch. $187, about what he expects, running the AC non-stop through a 110-degree month. 4,000 miles away in Leipzig, Lena opens an envelope of her own, and this time she actually sits down. Her power bill for a modest 2-bedroom apartment just jumped again, not because she's using more, but because the price per unit did. She hasn't touched her thermostat, her bill still climbed. Here's the question worth asking. Why is Germany's energy bill accelerating again, right now, after 2 relatively calm years? And if you're an American looking at moving here, or just trying to understand what's actually happening in Germany's economy, what does that number mean for you? Hi, I'm Justin, and I've lived in Germany for over 12 years. This channel is about the costs nobody puts on a postcard, not the postcard version of Germany, the real receipts. Subscribe if you want the actual numbers instead of the tourist brochure version. The easy assumption is that German energy has always been expensive because of the country's aggressive shift to renewables, solar panels and wind turbines somehow being the villain in the story. That's the myth. The reality is messier and, honestly, more interesting. The renewable build-out is part of the price, but the spike hitting German households right now has much more to do with oil, gas, and how Germany structures its electricity bill than it does with wind turbines. And to be fair to the renewables are expensive argument, it's not baseless. Building out a modern grid, subsidizing early-stage wind and solar, and maintaining backup capacity for the days the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. All of that got paid for through the electricity bill for years, and grid expansion costs are still baked into what households pay today. That part of the myth has real numbers behind it. Let's start with the jump itself. Germany's overall inflation rate climbed to 2.8% in July, and energy is the reason it's accelerating instead of cooling. Energy prices alone jumped 8.3% year over year, up sharply from 3.4% just the month before. Bundesbank President Joachim Nagel has been blunt about it publicly. The disinflation story Germany was telling itself is proving stickier and slower than economists expected, largely because energy isn't cooperating. A big piece of that jump traces back to renewed tension in the Middle East, pushing global oil prices higher, plus the expiration of a temporary fuel tax reduction that had been propping down prices at the pump. Now strip away the politics and look at the actual number on the meter. The average German household pays somewhere around 37 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. If you're stuck on the default fallback utility rate, the tariff you're automatically enrolled in if you never actively choose a provider, you can pay closer to 42 cents. Compare that to the US, where the average residential rate sits around 18 cents per kilowatt hour as of this summer. Do the math, and German electricity is running roughly double the American price, sometimes more, for the exact same kilowatt hour. Here's the part that surprises Americans the most. Germany layers a stack of fixed charges directly onto every electricity bill that simply don't exist on a typical US bill. Grid fees, what you pay just to have electricity delivered to your building, regardless of how much you use, make up a real chunk of that per kilowatt hour price. On top of that, there's a federal electricity tax baked in, plus sales tax on the whole bill. An American paying their local utility is mostly paying for the electricity itself. A German household is paying for the electricity, the wires to get it there, a federal tax on top, and sales tax on all of it. Put that in real annual terms. A typical 2-person apartment in Germany, using a modest amount of electricity, lands somewhere around 740 euros a year just for power. And that number is climbing, not falling, as this year's figures roll in. That's before you've paid a cent for heat. And heat is its own separate bill entirely in Germany, in a way most Americans have never had to think about. Millions of German households, especially in older buildings, still heat with heating oil, bought and stored in bulk, with the price swinging directly with global oil markets. When crude oil spikes, like it has this year, that heating oil bill spikes right along with it, on top of whatever's happening with electricity. Here's where it gets interesting. Renewables now supply more than half of Germany's electricity generation on an annual basis. Genuinely one of the most successful transitions of any major economy, and yet prices are still high, and this year they're moving the wrong direction. Those two facts aren't a contradiction. Cheap solar and wind power reduced Germany's dependence on imported gas, but it didn't reduce the grid infrastructure bill, the taxes, or the fact that Germany still burns oil and gas for a meaningful share of its energy and gets hit hard every time global prices move. But here's the twist most people miss when they see that 37-cent number and assume Germans are getting fleeced twice as hard as Americans. Germans, on average, use dramatically less electricity per household than Americans do. smaller living spaces, far less air conditioning, more efficient appliances by regulation, and a culture that just doesn't run everything all day the way an American home does. So the sticker price per kilowatt hour is brutal. But the actual annual bill gap between a German household and an American household isn't nearly as wide as that price difference alone would suggest. If you actually want to see where your money's going instead of just guessing, this is the tool I'd point you to. A smart plug that sits between the outlet and whatever you're running, tracking exactly how many watts it's pulling and what that adds up to on your bill by the month. Plug in the fridge, the space heater, whatever you suspect is the culprit, and you get a real number instead of a shrug. I'll drop a link below to the one I actually use. So back to Lena, sitting with that envelope in Leipzig. Her bill didn't climb because she suddenly started using more power. It climbed because Germany's whole pricing structure got hit by an oil shock, a fading fuel tax break, and fixed grid costs that don't care how careful she is. Kevin in Phoenix is paying less per kilowatt hour, but he's also running an air conditioner nonstop through a 110-degree month in a way Lena's apartment was never built to need. So what do you actually do with this? First, if you're on the default utility tariff in Germany, switch. It's often the fastest 200 to 400 euros a year you'll ever save. Second, if you're weighing a move to Germany, budget on the higher end for the electricity rate, but budget on the lower end for usage, because German homes are simply built to use less. Third, if you're already here, ask about a fixed rate contract before winter. Locking in a rate now protects you if oil prices keep climbing. Fourth, track your heating fuel purchases separately from electricity, because in Germany, those are two completely different expenses with two completely different risk factors. Germany's energy bill isn't expensive because of solar panels, and it isn't some green energy morality tale. It's oil markets, tax structure, and grid economics stacked on top of each other in a way that never makes it onto a postcard. If you want more of these real number breakdowns, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.